Once we were sure that we had found transgenic materials in Oaxaca, we wanted to have a publication that would be very visible. So we sent it for publication to Nature. Nature sent this article off to experts to be reviewed 5 times around. And then Nature said, yes, we will publish it. By that time, however, the news that this information was coming out made very many people within the industry very nervous and very unhappy. So they themselves started a discreditation campaign for the paper. They did not want the paper to be published, and if it was going to be published, they wanted people not to believe what this paper was saying. Now we know the industry hired professional public relations companies, propaganda companies, who at the time were experimenting for the first time with something called viral marketing, which is the idea that a PR company, a public relations company, will go into the internet and start spreading ideas around on behalf of the companies that hire them, but without telling people that they are being paid by these companies. So this company called the Bivings Group, they created 2 fictitious characters, 2 doctors, Dr. Smetashek and Dr. I forget. They made up 2 names, and these 2 doctors went on the internet and started spreading rumors that what we had said was false and that the paper was flawed, and so on and so forth. And the way the internet works is that people really respond to each other's opinions, and the idea started really spreading around that our paper was false and had been submitted under false and maybe illegal conditions. Whatever the case is, because we don't really know to this date, Nature decided to print 2 letters criticizing our paper, and also to print a very confusing editorial where they say, we don't want to take positions, but based on what we know now, we have doubts that we should have published the paper back then. That is completely against the way we do science. Nature itself recognizes that they had never done anything like this in 130 years, the whole history of the magazine. So there was something seriously important happening that they do not want to talk about. But I believe, I am convinced, it was pressure from these industrial actors, industrial activists, who wanted to change Nature's position towards this problem. The industry said, you don't need to worry about this because we have it under control. The control is really the question. And they had been telling the world that they really had control over these crops, that if they planted corn, transgenic corn in one field, that transgenic corn would not go anywhere else. So our discovery that we were finding transgenic corn maybe 1,000 miles from the nearest legal transgenic corn field was a huge problem for them, because it really showed very simply and with real evidence that they really did not have control. So they lost the claim to having control over these materials. And from that point on, they started talking about coexistence.
Though our Pustai's findings are attacked by politics and industry, all foods containing genetically modified particles disappeared within days from UK supermarket shelves. Pustai himself is still forbidden from continuing his research.
Ami ott lent volt, annak a malomnak a pofánkra.
Kösz, hogy a szép születkor, igaz?
Aha. Ugye mennyi pörtön is?
After that explosion in 1998 August, when everybody was sort of certainly in the higher echelons of they were talking about all sorts of nasty things about me. We just took 2 weeks, came here, and nobody cared tuppence about or genetic modification or what I did. I was not a professor, just Arpad. That's what it is, and that really gave us a good respite, refreshed us so that we could go back and face the music again. Take care is started to rain, and when the weather changes very fast here.
The most hurtful thing of all was that he wasn't allowed to talk to his colleagues, and his colleagues weren't allowed to talk to him. So whenever he entered the room, they went silent within seconds and wouldn't talk to each other, and of course they wouldn't talk to him. And at the same time, they started to disappear one by one, leaving him on his own. So by the end of it, we took to the habit of having our lunch separately in my office. Arpad is not the complaining time. He will never tell anybody how much was he hurt by the handling of him by the art. It was really, really very hard on him. Well, Arpad and I worked together from 1990 continuously on the same projects, and we worked together on the GM project as well. The only reason that he is allowed to talk about it, that he has been given permission by the House of Commons, the Parliament, and the Technology and Science Committee of the British Parliament. All the others in the group, including me, and we are talking about 20 people, we were forbidden to talk about what has happened to the rat, what sort of experiments did we carry out, what was going on at that time at the rat. So we were gagged, and our gagging is for lifetime. Even the Secret Service, they gag people for 25 years. If I happen to live to my 70s, it will be well over that time, and I still won't be able to talk about it.
I never actually felt outcast from the scientific community because my connection with the ordinary scientists has remained excellent. I do now regard this more like one of the most important times of my life, of thinking and reflecting on what happened. So instead of being banished from life, I became a start of a new life. You know, when you meet people like, for example, Prince Charles, then I wouldn't have met him otherwise. So I think that there are pluses, strong pluses. It is all going in the wrong direction. Now, let's assume that, and we have seen a few examples, that animals fed on GM material, they had very considerable physiological changes. Now, when you are eating that animal fed on GM, you will be eating an animal that had already been changed into a different animal. And there is no safety risk assessment done on this. And it is a policy decision by the governments and by the biotechnology industry that they would just simply go on the basis that if you don't know, they cannot be held responsible. So remember that the animal that has been fed on GM has been changed.
You always will find scientists who are diametrically opposed for one reason or another. But frankly, you have to look at the bulk of the evidence. And the bulk of the evidence is simply this. These products have been out. Virtually every food that you consume, including you in Germany, has some genetically modified product in it, okay, whether it's soybeans or corn. There has not been a single documented analyzed case of even a headache attributable to genetic modification.
Vienna. Austrian scientists carried out long-term studies that showed genetically modified maize fed to mice significantly reduced their fertility. The number of offspring was less than those compared to non-GM fed mice, and they also developed more slowly.
I haven't read the study yet. It came out today. I immediately called my office and asked them to get me a hold of the study. So my assistant called into Austria and spoke to someone, and they're going to get me the study as soon as possible. But the finding is consistent. Fertility problems with animals fed genetically engineered crops. We saw that with soybeans, and farmers reported that with corn as well. It's very difficult to do proper studies because Monsanto doesn't allow people to use their products for studies, and they also don't allow access to the parent line so that you can compare the exact same soybean, with the only difference being that one is genetically engineered and one is not. One example is this Russian scientist, Dr. Irina Ermakova. She fed genetically engineered soy flour to rats, and more than half of the offspring died within 3 weeks. Now, one of the criticisms was that she didn't use carefully controlled genetically engineered soy along with its nearly identical non-GM soy counterpart. But Monsanto didn't allow that soy to be released into the public, so she didn't have access to it. Dr. Arpad Pustai wants to repeat that study, but he also can't get that soy for his research.
Global sales in the billions of dollars, millions of farmers and backyard gardeners have come to rely on the weed killer called Roundup.
Roundup Extended Control. It kills tough weeds fast.
What makes this product effective is glyphosate, a synthesized compound discovered by John Franz over 30 years ago.
Als hier in der Region begonnen wurde mit der Mit dem Einsatz der Gentechnik in der Sojaproduktion hat man dann die Bauern eingeladen.
When genetic engineering technology was first used in soy production, the local farmers were invited to parties with free beer and meat, and they were asked to bring along their farming hoe. After a good meal and some drinks, they then did a ritual, putting all the hoes into a circle and burning them.
Als Symbol dazu, dass man nie mehr
As a symbol that one wouldn't have to hoe anymore. And as a gift, each farmer was then given a litre of glyphosate. And they were told this would be technical progress. The original idea was to produce a genetically modified soy that was resistant to glyphosate. Glyphosate is a herbicide whose famous brand Roundup is produced by Monsanto. Now, after a couple of years, you can see that more and more weeds are resistant to glyphosate.
Cornisa canadiensis, kanadisches Berufskraut auf Deutsch.
This is Canadian fleabane, a new kind of weed, which is horrible now. It grows to be higher than the soy itself.
Die Soja herauswächst.
My father just said that the cooperative here tried hard to fight it with glyphosate at a high dosage. Normally 1 litre per hectare is allowed legally. They used 8 litres per hectare, and still that wasn't enough. Then they stopped the experiment. Everything here is completely resistant to glyphosate.
Also ist total resistent gegen Glyphosat. Rio Grande do Sul, dieser Bundesstaat hier, hat
Rio Grande do Sul, the federal state here, has used 85% more glyphosate over the past 4 years since GM soy cultivation was started. This is an ecological catastrophe. So the argument that with GM soy one uses fewer pesticides is simply not true.
Stimmt nicht das Argument, dass man hier mit Gensoja weniger Pestiziden einsetzen will.
New York. Official statistics reveal that in the past 10 years, food-related illnesses have practically doubled in the US since the introduction of GM food to the American diet.
Vielen werden erstaunen, wenn ich sage, dass ein Gentechnikkritiker ja mit Rousseau angefangen hat. Rousseau ist für mich
Many will be amazed when I say that a GM critic started with Rousseau. Rousseau, for me, was one of the great authors I ever studied. Here I've got Emilio, for example, the book on education and bringing up children. To what extent do institutions make people the way they are, or were they born that way? And then I've also written that first publication about Rousseau in 2000, where I actually wrote about Rousseau's concept of democracy. Rousseau said the origin of inequality between people is private property, and there it all began. It starts with somebody building a fence around his land and saying, "This belongs to me." The bad thing, Rousseau said, isn't that he did this, but that the others believed him. Today, the same can be said about genetic engineering. We've got a sort of new feudalism. Nature's resources are being privatized, and the others, who also own these natural resources, pay only to be able to use parts of these resources. And a part of that is knowledge of what's been produced before and getting newly patented.
Damit sie Teile von diesen Ressourcen wieder nutzen können. Und Teil davon ist sogar Wissen, was vorher schon produziert war und jetzt wieder patentiert.
Even nature is getting patented. So in these neo-feudalist times we live in, it is so obvious to me that we're going back to times when a king said, "This river is mine," or "This land is mine," and farmers have to pay in order to use it. Back then they had religion to authorize and justify that. Strangely enough, today it's the scientists.
Zu rechtfertigen. Heute merkwürdigerweise machen die Wissenschaftler das.
Yeah, this little house came to us as it feels as something of fate. And it's in a very special place. Below us, we can see the whole of the public campus of Berkeley, the University of California, Berkeley. And we're standing at a boundary where that campus meets the private and military part of the research machine. This is a big research machine. One side of it has public, the other side is private, corporate, and military. The generation of knowledge that comes out of this place is very important for the world, not only because of technology, but also because of how we understand ourselves in our role in the world, in our role with nature. So that enclosing of the knowledge that used to be public and becomes private or becomes corporate or becomes militarized secret, that enclosure of knowledge is something that I consider to be very damaging for the movement of science and the movement of knowledge. So it is a very strong battle that is happening here and in other places in the world to try and protect that diversity of knowledge, that diversity of culture. The latest development in this battle has been the arrival here on this campus of BP, British Petroleum, who would like to be called Beyond Petroleum. BP came here offering $500 million, which is much more than anybody had ever offered the university, supposedly for research. Administrators for the university find it very difficult to say no to money. And it doesn't matter where the money comes from, they want the money. So they try to pass this contract with BP without people noticing. But we have been able to find out a few things about it. We know that BP wants new buildings in the canyon. They want buildings that are built behind the fences of the national lab so that nobody can access them. They want access to our students. They want access to our seminars so that they can find out which ideas are useful for them. They want to have control over publication, what gets published, what gets said publicly or not. But more importantly, they also want access to the curriculum, to what will be taught in the university. And because this is a public university, we also determine the curriculum of the children from kindergarten all the way to high school. And BP now has access to deciding what is called science and what is not called science. So now they can say whoever is on our side is a scientist and whoever is not on our side is not a scientist. So the power that they gain from that is extraordinary. And they close the door shut to any public view of what's happening behind the walls, behind the fences and the screens of academic research. Unfortunately, we are in a minority, people who oppose it. And I have been very involved in trying to oppose this as well as other advances of this corporatized kind of science, this privatized kind of science, because I believe that the main problem is that people don't realize what's happening. And by the time they will wake up, it will be too late. The possibility of having a public university doing public research and developing public understanding of humanity is going to be gone. We are very far from free speech at this university. You're not allowed to ask many questions and you're not allowed to say many things. And if you do, you get into serious trouble. And I am just one of many examples where people are punished by what they say or what they research. In my case, I was pushed out of the university at least 3 times. Every time I fought back, and we managed to keep my job. But it's been very difficult. And I am grateful that there is this protection around my position right now after so many years of battle. I feel that I have this freedom and I really intend to use it as much as possible. We are manipulating life in a way that we really do not understand, we cannot control, and then we're letting it go into the environment. So it's a change that is radical, that is unprecedented, that is beyond anything we can understand, and it's unretrievable. We cannot get it back. That's my concern. Isn't that beautiful? It is very true that the power that technocrats and experts have developed in these years is so large and so out of control that it has become much more of a religion. And it's a religion that has many dogmas, and one of those dogmas is that humans have the power to change nature the way they want. It's complete hubris because we can't.
In small rivers like this throughout the northeast of America, salmon used to come up these rivers, even small rivers like this. Wherever the salmon is born, and they're all born in little rivers like this, they come back after their journey. They stay in a river like this for almost a full season, and they go out into the ocean for 2 or 3 seasons. They get quite large, but they always come back to rivers just like this to spawn. Salmon teach us a new way of thinking about our lives and our economy. How can we have a sustainable, life-giving economy rather than a linear one that is always about more and more production no matter what the cost to nature or ourselves? I've always said, you'll only defend that which you love. So if people say, what should I do? How shall I defend the environment? Go out and fall in love with it. Fall in love with the river. Fall in love with the farm. Fall in love with a species. Just fall in love with something. Believe me, when you do, then you'll defend it.